In this topic, we're going to discuss the transport of carbon dioxide and the Bohr effect. So, by the end of this topic, you should be able to answer the questions: what is the Bohr effect? And how is carbon dioxide transported? So, what is the Bohr effect? The carbon dioxide produced by respiring tissues must be carried back to the gaseous exchange surface for removal from the body tissue because its accumulation would be harmful. This carbon dioxide is necessary for the release of oxygen from hemoglobin to the tissues. This is the Bohr effect. So hemoglobin has a reduced affinity for oxygen in the presence of carbon dioxide. So the greater the concentration of carbon dioxide, the more readily it releases oxygen. If you look at these different surfaces, you've got the lungs and the respiring tissues. At the gaseous exchange surface, for example, the alveoli and the capillaries, the level of carbon dioxide is low because it's diffusing across the exchange surface and it's being expelled from the organism. Hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen is increased. So coupled with the high concentration of oxygen in the lungs, this means that the oxygen is readily absorbed by the hemoglobin. In the respiring tissues, for example the muscles, the level of carbon dioxide is high in the blood because of its production during respiration. So hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen is reduced. So coupled with the low concentration of oxygen in the muscles, this means that oxygen is readily released from the hemoglobin to the muscle cells. If you were to draw the oxygen dissociation curve for hemoglobin in the presence of different levels of carbon dioxide, this is what you get. On the left, there's a low partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Where would you find this in the body? Well, it would be at the gaseous exchange surface. This means that the hemoglobin binds with the oxygen more readily since carbon dioxide levels are low. What about on the right? Where would you find a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide? In respiring tissues, this shifts the dissociation curve to the right. This means that hemoglobin readily gives up oxygen to the respiring tissues. This is especially important during exercise because the more carbon dioxide that is produced, the more readily oxygen is supplied from the hemoglobin. So what is the Bohr effect and what causes the Bohr effect? So this Bohr effect, which is the shifting of the oxygen dissociation curve in the presence of carbon dioxide, is caused by the acidic nature of dissolved carbon dioxide. So dissolved carbon dioxide forms hydrogen ions and hydrogen carbonate ions. It's the hydrogen ions that lower the pH and the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So high carbon dioxide levels cause oxygen to be released, and this is the Bohr effect. So this high carbon dioxide level causes oxygen to be released because the hydrogen ion concentration from the dissolved carbon dioxide lowers the pH, causing hemoglobin to be released. Low pH, caused by other chemicals, for example lactate, also reduces hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen in the same way. So here you can see the hydrogen ion is causing the oxygen to be dissociated from the hemoglobin. Right, let's move on to how carbon dioxide is transported. The diagram is from your Jones & Jones textbook. So about 5% of carbon dioxide is carried in the blood plasma, 10% is in combination with hemoglobin, and the remaining 85% is transported as hydrogen carbonate ions. So let's have a look at in combination with hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide can combine with the amino group in the protein part of the hemoglobin, and it forms carb-aminohemoglobin. About 85% of the total carbon dioxide is transported as hydrogen carbonate ions. So let's have a look at this reaction. Red blood cells contain an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. This converts carbon dioxide and water into carbonic acid. This then splits into hydrogen carbonate ions and hydrogen ions. The hydrogen ions produced will combine with hemoglobin to form hemoglobinic acid. And so it causes hemoglobin to release oxygen, which will diffuse out of the cell into the nearby respiring tissue. The hydrogen carbonate ions will then diffuse into the blood plasma and can combine with sodium to form sodium hydrogen carbonate. So in this way, hemoglobin acts as a buffer. So it helps to keep the pH of the blood around 7.4. Now the loads of the negatively charged hydrogen carbonate ions would upset the ionic balance of the red blood cells. So to counteract this, chloride ions diffuse into the red blood cell. So this is called the chloride shift. Right, in summary, we discussed the Bohr effect. So this is the reduced affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen in the presence of carbon dioxide, or a low pH. Remember that in the presence of carbon dioxide, the oxygen dissociation curve shifts to the right. So the hemoglobin readily gives up oxygen to respiring tissues. We also discussed the transport of carbon dioxide. Remember that 5% is transported in the plasma, 10% is combined with hemoglobin to form carb-aminohemoglobin, and the remaining 85% forms hydrogen carbonate ions. So important keywords to remember from that reaction is the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, hemoglobinic acid, and the chloride shift. And that concludes our lesson. The end.